Good morning. I'd like to call to order the June 23rd, 2020 meeting of the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you here. First item we will undertake is the call of the roll to ensure that we have a quorum. When your name is called, please answer. Please be advised that we do know that Mr. France will not be here today. He called yesterday afternoon and had a matter come up in which he has to attend to. So just want to give members of the commission a heads up. Answer to the roll. Mr. Tankard?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Zedrin?
Here.
Dr. Neal?
Here.
Mr. Ballard?
Here.
Mr. Minor?
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Lusk?
Here.
Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett?
Here.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. Is counsel from the Attorney General's office present, Ms. Block?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call on Mr. Tankard for the invocation. Mr. Tankard?
Lord, let us pray. Although we are apart for this meeting, we are blessed to come together with this virtual telephonic meeting to do the important business of the Commission and the Commonwealth. It is our sincere desire and responsibility to consider without bias the facts at hand and to make impartial decisions. We are thankful for all the diligent work of the dedicated VMRC staff to make this meeting possible. Their efforts in gathering and presenting the facts and science to the Commission is truly a blessing. At this time, when many question the credibility of our institutions, we must redouble our efforts to make this Commission work for all the citizens of the Commonwealth. For this we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Tankard. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Are there any corrections, deletions, or additions to the agenda by members of staff, excuse me, or the Commission? The chair will entertain a motion on the agenda.
So move.
So moved by Mr. Minor. Is there a second?
I'll second, Dr. Neal.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda are the review of the minutes. You've had an opportunity to review the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions to the minutes by members of the Commission? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Who is that by?
John Zedrin.
Thank you, Mr. Zedrin. Is there a second?
Second. James Minor.
Second by Mr. Minor. Further discussion? Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. The next item we have on the agenda are permits, projects over $500,000 with no objections and with staff recommendation for approval. Mr. Watkinson?
Yes, sir, Commissioner. Good morning. Good morning, associate members. Today we have two so-called page 2 items. We have subjected these projects to our public interest review. There have been no objections and staff is recommending approval. With that, I'll read the project description for each of the two projects. Huntington Ingalls Incorporated, Newport News Shipbuilding. Request authorization to mechanically maintenance dredge up to 300,000 cubic yards a year of state-owned submerged land to maintain depths of minus 30 feet below mean low water adjacent to Pier 8, Pier 9, Dry Dock 3, and Dry Dock 12, depths of minus 40 feet below mean low water adjacent to Pier 5, Pier 6, Dry Dock 1, Dry Dock 2, Dry Dock 4, and Dry Dock 12, depths of minus 50 feet below mean low water adjacent to Pier 2, Pier 3, Dry Dock 10, Dry Dock 11, and outfitting berth 1, and depths of minus 72 feet below mean low water adjacent to floating dry dock basin at Huntington Ingalls Newport News Shipyard, adjacent to the James River in the city of Newport News. In this case, staff is recommending approval with adherence to the permit conditions listed in the previously authorized permit, which was VMRC number 10-0518. Essentially, this is re-permitting a previous dredging project that was authorized 10 years ago. In keeping with staff policy, after 10 years, we review a new permit application to make sure conditions are the same. Item 2B, Electric and Power Company requests authorization to modify their existing permit. This involves temporarily impacting an additional 184 linear feet of state-owned subaqueous bottom to facilitate alternative construction access to transmission line support structures 24/180 through 224/182 in support of the line 224 Mattaponi River rebuild project in King and Queen County. Would be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Watkinson by members of the commission? And for the record, that is Mr. Anthony Watkinson, Chief of the Habitat Management Division. Any questions by members of the commission? There being none, this is a public hearing. Does anyone wish to be heard on these matters, pro or con, for or against? There being none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the projects over $500,000 with no objection.
Dr. Neal, move to approve page 2 items.
Was that Mr. Tankard?
Yes.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it, Dr. Neal.
Seconded by Dr. Neal. Further discussion? Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor? Mr. Minor? Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Recalling Mr. Minor.
It looks like he just left for a second, Steve. He might have had bad connection.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he just popped off.
Okay, we've lost Mr. Minor. Chair votes aye. We do have majority vote on these items. We'll check with Mr. Minor later to see what his vote would be if he was on to hear the matters. Item number 3, consent agenda items. Mr. Watkinson, do we have any consent agenda items?
No, sir, we do not.
Thank you. Item number 4, closed meeting for consultation with or briefing by council. Ms. Block, is there any need to have a closed meeting for briefing with you?
No, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have to meet the phone, but go ahead.
Right here. Okay. The next item on the agenda is item number 5, Bruce R. Lee, number 200357.
Mr. Baldwin, members of the commission, good morning. This should be a quick item for you. Bruce Lee is requesting authorization to construct two 48-foot-long timber jetties alongside his existing boat ramp at his property on the Rappahannock River in Caroline County. The project requires a wetlands under sub-acres permit.
Can you identify yourself for the record, please?
Yes, sir. Randy Owen. I think I need to be sworn, sir.
Do you swear the testimony that you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
You are acting today as the default wetlands board because Caroline County has not adopted the wetland zoning ordinance. The project's located approximately 16 miles upstream of the Route 301 bridge and the town of Port Royal on the Rappahannock River. The river at this location is approximately 600 feet wide. This is a photograph of Mr. Lee's existing pier and boat ramp, which he applied for and was approved by the commission in 1998 when it was constructed. This ramp routinely shoals over with muddy sediments, limiting its use and accessibility. The proposed jetties, which are highlighted or are shown in the red lines, have been aligned on either side of the concrete ramp, and they do avoid the tidal vegetated wetlands you see in the photograph. These are the drawings depicting the same thing. You see the ramp in gray. The timber jetties will be installed on either side of it. We have not received any negative public comment or objections to this project. I have spoken with both of the adjacent riparian property owners who have not raised objections. So for my summary and recommendation, the proposed timber jetties are aligned to avoid impacts to the existing tidal freshwater vegetated wetlands and should reduce the rate of muddy sediments depositing on the ramp and the need to remove the material from the ramp surface. The project will result in impacts to approximately 9 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands. Compensation for these impacts is not deemed necessary based on VMRC's existing wetlands mitigation compensation policy and supplemental guidelines. Accordingly, after evaluating the merits of the project and considering all the factors contained in 28-1302-10B of the code and our wetlands compensation policy and supplemental guidelines, we recommend approval of the project with the royalty of $14 for the encroachment over 14 square feet of state-owned submerged land assessed at a rate of $1 per square foot. One last comment, Commissioner. In my evaluation, I have 28 square feet, but I made a math error, and I have corrected it for this morning's meeting. So it's a $14 recommended encroachment royalty. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Are there any questions by members of the commission for Mr. Owen in reference to this project? Hearing none, this is a public hearing. Is anyone in the public wishes to be heard on this matter for or against? There being none, the matter is before the commission.
I move we approve item 5, John Zedrin.
Motion made by Mr. Zedrin to approve item 5. Is there a second to the motion?
Second, James Minor.
Second by Mr. Minor. Further discussion? Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 6, Ryan's Cove Developers, LLC, number 20-0256. Who's handling this matter?
Good morning. This is Allison Lay, and I will be
Lay.
presenting this.
Thank you, Ms. Lay. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give before the commission be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Proceed, please, ma'am.
All right. So Brian's Cove Developers is requesting authorization to construct 5 riprap outfalls, 3 of which are after the fact, approximately 240 linear feet of after the fact riprap revetment, and an 8-foot wide by 45-foot long pier with a 36-foot by 36-foot covered pavilion at property along a man-made cove of Deep Creek in the city of Chesapeake. And this project requires a tidal wetlands permit. Next slide. So the project is located in Chesapeake, just south of I-64 near the high-rise bridge. Next slide. The project is located within a man-made cove off of Deep Creek. In this image, you can see the neighborhood development that is surrounding the project. This is an old aerial, and this section of the neighborhood is almost completed now. Next slide. This drawing shows the location of each outfall around the edge of the cove, as well as where the riprap revetment was placed and where the pier and pavilion will be placed. I will go over the impacts from each aspect of the project, starting with outfall number 1. Next slide. In these drawings, the mean high water line is shown in red, the mean low water line is shown in blue, and the vegetated tidal wetland areas are shown in green. The first outfall will impact 162 square feet of vegetated wetlands. Next slide. This photo shows the first outfall. The existing riprap is in the uplands, and it will be extended to the mean low water line, which will impact vegetated tidal wetlands. Next slide. Outfall 2 and 3 are both after the fact. The second outfall is currently impacting 150 square feet of vegetated wetlands, and it will impact an additional 327 square feet once it is extended to the mean low water line. The third outfall is currently impacting 51 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands, and it will impact an additional 199 square feet once it is extended. Next slide. This picture is of the second outfall, showing where the riprap has fallen into the vegetated wetlands. Next slide. This photo shows the third outfall, which is currently impacting non-vegetated wetlands. Next slide. Outfall number 4 is also after the fact, and the outfall impacts 164 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands. Next slide. This is a photo of the fourth outfall, and as you can see, it's within the riprap revetment. Next slide. The fifth and last outfall will impact 182 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands and will also impact 10 square feet of vegetated wetlands. Next slide. This photo Next slide.
Ms. Lay, we're losing you. You need to start over on this slide, and please start over again. I don't know whether it's your cell phone or what, but please start with the description of this slide again.
Okay, sorry about that. So this slide shows a photo. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So this slide shows a photo of the last outfall, where the riprap is currently in the uplands and will be extended to mean low water, impacting both vegetated and non-vegetated wetlands. All right, next slide. This is a typical cross-section drawing for all of the outfalls, and this just shows that the outfalls will all extend to the mean low water line. Next slide. This is a drawing of the riprap revetment that is currently impacting approximately 265 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands, just at the very channelward edge of the riprap revetment. And the next picture on the next slide shows the riprap revetment, and this photo was taken at low tide. And then the next slide shows the riprap revetment taken at high tide, which has the channelward edge of the riprap underwater. Next slide. This is a plan view and cross-section drawing for the pier and covered pavilion. The pier will cross 187 square feet of vegetated wetlands and will be a minimum of 4 feet above the wetland substrate. The covered pavilion will be constructed in the man-made cove and therefore does not need a subaqueous permit from VMRC. Next slide. There will be a total of 649 square feet of vegetated wetland impact from the placement of riprap for the outfalls. 150 square feet of this will be after the fact, and then there will be the additional 187 square feet of vegetated wetland that will be crossed at the pier. There will be 871 square feet of non-vegetated wetland impact. 480 of this will be after the fact. The applicant is prepared to purchase 649 square feet of mitigation credits from the new Mill Creek Tidal Mitigation Bank for impacts to the vegetated wetlands. Next slide. The applicant did receive other permits for construction, including the City of Chesapeake issued CBPA approval on November 21st, 2017 for the roads, outfall pipes, and riprap. And this included the first 4 outfalls. The one issued in 2019 included the last outfall. So that was a separate one when they expanded the development a little bit. The Army Corps of Engineers issued a permit on April 1st, 2020, and that included the Nationwide Permit 7, which was for the outfalls, as well as the Regional Permit 18 for the pier and pavilion. Yesterday afternoon, we also received 2 general permits from DEQ that were issued in 2017 for impacts to non-tidal wetlands in the development area. Next slide. Since this application contains after-the-fact authorization, civil charges will need to be assessed. Each structure is being considered as a separate violation. So I'll start with outfall number 2, which has impacted 150 square feet of vegetated tidal wetlands. The impact for this outfall was considered significant since the riprap resulted in vegetated tidal wetland loss, and staff would have recommended avoiding the vegetated tidal wetlands area had an application been submitted before construction. The degree of deviation or non-compliance was considered major since the development company has an environmental team that obtained other required permits for the project but failed to submit a joint permit application. Accordingly, staff recommends a $10,000 civil charge for this violation. Next slide. Outfall number 3 has impacted 51 square feet of non-vegetated tidal wetlands. The impact for this outfall was considered moderate since the riprap impacts non-vegetated wetlands. The degree of deviation or non-compliance was considered major for the same reason listed for outfall number 2. Accordingly, staff recommends a $9,000 civil charge for this violation. Next slide. Outfall number 4 has impacted 164 square feet of non-vegetated tidal wetlands. The impact for this outfall was considered moderate, and the degree of deviation or non-compliance was considered major for the same reason listed for outfall number 3. Accordingly, staff also recommends a $9,000 civil charge for this violation. Next slide. The riprap revetment placed along the shoreline of the cove to protect a roadway was found to impact approximately 265 square feet of non-vegetated tidal wetlands. The impact for the riprap revetment was considered moderate since the riprap impacts non-vegetated wetland areas. The degree of deviation or non-compliance was considered major since the applicant failed to keep the riprap outside of the jurisdictional wetland areas. Accordingly, staff also recommends a $9,000 civil charge for this violation. The applicant is requesting to move the riprap outside of the wetlands in lieu of paying this civil charge specifically. Next slide. Staff understands that the subdivision has been constructed with the current outfall locations, and therefore they would be difficult to move to avoid vegetated tidal wetland impacts. We believe that the applicant should have submitted a joint permit application before starting construction so that the site could have been properly assessed by staff for potential impacts. Staff believes that the payment of civil charges and purchase of mitigation credits is appropriate to compensate for the impacts to tidal wetlands. Therefore, after evaluating the merits of the project and considering all of the factors contained in 28.2-1302-10B of the Code of Virginia and the Wetlands Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines. Staff recommends approval of the project as proposed, conditioned upon the purchase of wetland credits at the New Mill Creek Tidal Mitigation Bank necessary to replace the loss of 649 square feet of tidal vegetated wetlands. And staff additionally recommends that the commission assess a total civil charge of $37,000 for the 4 unauthorized impacts to tidal wetlands. This concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Lay. Is there any questions by members of the commission?
John Zedrin, I have a question.
Mr. Zedrin, please proceed.
What is the developer's position on your recommendation?
The developer is not in agreement with our civil charge assessment, and they would like to make their case to lower that charge.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions by members of the commission?
Yes, I have a question.
Mr. Tankard, proceed.
You mentioned this is an outfall project, essentially. What will be coming out of these outfalls besides water?
Ms. Lay?
They are stormwater outfalls, so they contain water runoff from the neighborhood development. So anything that would be able to get into the drainage would be able to fall into the outfall. The applicant has told me that they have other BMPs in place, but they would be able to speak more specifically on that.
John Zedrin, I have another question.
Follow up, Mr. Zedrin?
If they did not put these outfalls in, what would happen to the water when it would rain on that land without the water, the outfalls?
They could have potentially designed the stormwater system differently, but if there was no stormwater, I imagine there may be some flooding problems. I'm not exactly sure where the water would run.
Mr. Yes, sir, Mr. Zedrin.
So if they didn't put these outfalls in the way they did, wouldn't the rain when it fall be washing the sediment and stuff from that land into the river?
Yeah, it could. The rain could fall onto the pavement and all of the new development.
Yeah, Mr. Zedrin, I would presume that just like any other flow of water, it would ultimately gravitate to the area of the lowest altitude or slope. So, yeah, I'm interested to hear about the best management practices they have in place as well, such as sedimentation ponds or anything like that. This appears to me to be a straight pipe effect right off the roads and right into the Elizabeth River. But I'm not going to make that assumption or presumption until I hear from the applicant. Further questions? Members of the commission.
Chad Ballard, and is the outfalls the only after the fact portion, or is the riprap associated with them after the fact as well?
The question, did you hear the question correctly, Ms. Lay?
No, it was breaking up.
The question was, would you like to repeat it, Mr. Ballard? You were breaking up a little bit.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
It's still a little bit broken. We can try.
Is the riprap revetments after the fact as well, or just the outfalls themselves?
It is the riprap associated with the outfalls that is after the fact. The outfall pipes themselves are outside of the Wetlands Board jurisdiction lines. It is the riprap placed at the base of the outfalls that will require authorization.
Further questions by members of the commission? Okay, there being none, is the applicant present or represented?
Yes, this is Christine Early. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we hear you well. Ms. Early, do you solemnly swear the testimony that you provide today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Please proceed. And who do you represent?
I represent the developer, Exeter Development. And
Okay, are you a member of that company, or are you independent? Are you?
I'm an employee of the company.
Okay, please proceed. Thank you, ma'am.
I live here locally in Virginia
Okay.
Beach.
Okay.
First, I would like to address the BMPs. We designed the site with 5 BMPs, and they're enormous. They run along the entire power line, which runs through the center of the development. And then we have planned outfalls along the cove, but there was significant runoff, and we actually had to install these outfalls as an emergency procedure. And I would like to note that we received approval through VMRC staff for the location of the riprap outside of the wetlands. And we designed it according to plan. We verified that. And since then, that riprap has slumped down on its own because of wave action and erosion in the cove.
Okay.
We did design it correctly and according to plan outside of the wetlands, but between the erosion, the wave action, and gravity, the riprap kind of slumped down.
Well, then one could beg the question. You said you designed it correctly, yet the riprap is falling into the waterway. Wouldn't that tend to indicate that maybe it was not designed correctly?
Well, right. We followed what our engineer and Bay Environmental suggested, and we would like to fix it, obviously right away, but we're afraid to do anything at this point. But we can easily have it removed and placed back, and we're looking at other things to stabilize the area better. We just had no idea that the erosion was so bad there.
So then, so that I understand before I ask any further questions, are you saying that you're willing to come back now and file a joint permit application with the Marine Resources Commission to correct this matter and let the staff review that? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we are willing to do that. We have a lot of heavy boat traffic. We didn't expect that. We have our community, they complain about this boat traffic all the time. It's supposed to be a private cove, but people have been going in there boating for years, and they speed in there. And also along the Elizabeth River, they're speeding right next to the cove, and it affects, the wave action in the cove.
Okay, thank you. Questions by members of the commission for the gentlelady?
I have a question. John Zedman.
Mr. Zedran, proceed.
How long is this going to anticipate if we were to allow you to do that, to get it right, how long do you anticipate it would take?
We can get the work done very fast. It's just the permitting part.
Can you give me a timeline, like months? After the permit's issued, how many months?
To complete the work?
Yes.
We can have it done within the month. I can get it done within a couple weeks.
Mr. Zedran, I'd like to ask Mr. Watkinson, Chief of Habitat, to comment on this matter, if it would be appropriate. Mr. Watkinson?
Yes, sir. It sounds like that what we're hearing about moving is the riprap revetment, the 240-foot long section, and removing that from the wetland edge. As you saw in Allison's photos, the few feet of the toe of that revetment is in tidal wetlands. So if the applicant or Ryan's Cove is proposing to remove that, you're right, we would need to see an application to excavate that material, how it would be proposed to be pulled out of the marsh, and what might be done to, stabilize that area that's disturbed as a result of the removal of the rock. I do want to make sure that, though, that it might and we might need to hear from the applicant here, that this removal that they're talking about, I don't think that's applies to the outfall structures themselves.
No, we're just talking about the riprap.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, any further questions on members of the commission before I weigh in? Because I'm looking at this. We do? Okay. Mr. Cahoon, would you like to speak?
Yes, Mr. Cahoon here. Jim Cahoon from Bay Environmental.
Mr. Cahoon, do you solemnly swear the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the true self you got?
Yes, sir.
Proceed, Mr. Cahoon.
Thank you for the opportunity in these very difficult times with this technology. Appreciate it very much. A couple of points I'd like to make. As the environmental consultant for this project, I've personally been involved in the project since 2003. There were multiple proposals for development of this property, and we went through many iterations of wetland permitting, reducing our non-tidal wetland impact, and at the same time avoiding tidal wetland impact. In 2017, we did submit that permit application, and VMRC staff reviewed that and authorized through their no permit required letter that it was the appropriate thing to do. The riprap outfalls, outfall protection, was installed, originally designed to stop at an elevation of 3 foot, which was above any vegetated tidal wetlands. So we were doing what everybody tells us to do, avoid impact. Through no fault of the applicant, there was significant erosion associated not only with those outfalls, but natural erosion within this cove. If you don't know the history of that particular cove, that was the burrow pit or the original high-rise bridge in Interstate 64. So it's a very sandy soils, and that's where they got the sand to build the approaches for that bridge. So we have erodible soils. In trying to avoid wetland impact, there are many times when design has to make some concessions. If you want to avoid wetland impact, you've got to stop your riprap outfall protection short, and that's what was done. As it eroded, riprap spilled into wetlands, and that's where we had the unauthorized impact. We have submitted the joint permit application to address these issues. That's what's currently under review. What we're trying to do is fix it right this time and carry that outlet protection down to mean low water. Almost every case we've seen where we have to design by regulation, and that's my mentor Walter Priest's term. It's not always the right thing to do to avoid wetland impact. In this case, we had a lot of other moving parts with the development, with our non-tidal wetland impacts, and that's where we ended up. So now we have an after the fact situation. We're trying to do the right thing. The permit application has been submitted for those impacts, and that's why we're here. The riprap revetment. We coordinated very closely with staff prior to the installation of that to ensure that there was no impact. There was concurrence from both the Corps of Engineers and from VMRC for that. Because of erosion, it appears that the riprap revetment has slumped, which has pushed it channelward of that 1.2 foot contour, which is the mean high water line in the Elizabeth River. And that's where we have impact there. We're working on a plan with the applicant to remove the very toe of that, to remove that impact. So I wanted to address the reason VMRC staff has suggested that the degree of noncompliance is major is because their environmental consultant didn't tell them to do the right thing. Well, that's not the case. We told them to do the right thing, avoid wetland impacts, avoid tidal wetland impacts. We did that. It's eroded. Now we have tidal wetland impacts, and that's a design issue. The stormwater system was reviewed by the state. It was reviewed by the city and approved. And that's where we've ended up. So I disagree that it's a major non-compliance. The impact may be moderate or significant, but for many years, this development has been planning and trying to do the right thing. So through natural causes, we now have an impact. I don't see that as a major non-compliance. That's not a knowing, intentional non-compliance issue. So I've said my piece with respect to that. And I stand by for any questions. Again, I've worked on this project since 2003. This is actually the third developer to work on the site to finally get a project to fruition. And I stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Coon. Any questions of Mr. Coon by members of the commission?
John Zedrin here.
Mr. Zedrin, proceed, please.
You said that this was reviewed by the VMRC staff. Who are you talking about?
Ms. Lay indicated that the staff in recommending the civil charges considered it major non-compliance.
No, you said that in the development of this project, you had contacted VMRC staff and had gone over these plans. Who were you talking about?
So in two instances there, the original permit application, which was submitted in 2017, which did not have tidal wetland impacts, was reviewed by Rachel Peabody on staff, and she issued the no permit required letter. The riprap revetment, the same. Rachel reviewed that, and we discussed back and forth with her for the installation of the riprap revetment.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Zedrin, I think in this situation, we may be talking, in all due respect, apples and oranges. When staff reviewed, if I understand it correctly, the project, it was going to be placed correctly in a manner in which it should. However, things have occurred that have brought the riprap and such revetments into violation. So that was then, this is now, for lack of a better way of putting it, I think. Further questions by members of the commission? I'm sorry, Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett?
Yes, I was just hoping to hear from staff a little bit more in response to Mr. Cahoon's comment about, this is in response to natural causes. It seems like, given the damage that's occurred, that, the title mitigation bank recommendation by staff, and I believe the civil charges do seem very justified. So I just wanted to, if I could, hear a reaction to Mr. Cahoon's comments in terms of kind of the sequence of events.
If I may, Chairman, this is Jim Cahoon.
Mr. Coon?
I'd also remind Ms. Everett that her husband worked on this project.
I can recuse myself if needed. I think my husband worked at Bay Environmental maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm happy to stop making comments or recuse myself. I was not aware of that. I'm surprised about that, but again, I defer to you, Commissioner Bowman, and how you'd like me to proceed.
Yes, ma'am. I think you should recuse, and I think the commission should not consider the last question made by Ms. Everett at this time. Further questions by members of the commission?
I have a question that, with regard to the outfall of what the applicant believes will be coming out of those pipes and what he's doing to mitigate for what comes out of those pipes.
Okay. Mr. Coon, do you want to respond to that, or do you want the applicant to respond?
I can address it, and then if Christine has any follow-up.
Okay.
So the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality's stormwater management regulations dictate what comes out of these pipes. And the neighborhood, just like every other neighborhood, was designed in accordance with those regulations. There are best management practices on the development as required by that stormwater management regulation. So it's residential stormwater that comes out of these pipes after, where appropriate, runs through the best management practices, just like every other neighborhood and every other residential outfall.
Further question?
No, sir.
Thank you. Any further questions? Well, this is one of those cases where it's all in a matter of optics. Of course, this commission is not in a position to try to make money off of mistakes that occur, but at the same time, if the mistakes that are made egregiously, then it's our codified responsibility to assess civil charges. I think the question lies is, where do we want to end up at the end of the day with this project? I think Mr. Cahoon, I believe, has come to this commission a number of times. I am a little dismayed that if there was going to be some issue pertaining to a commission member and that issue was going to be brought up, it should have been brought up to my attention prior to testimony, but that's neither here nor there, other than the way that I feel about it. So I think staff has done their job and their due diligence as far as making an overall assessment of what they see. But then again, that assessment may be in the eyes of the beholder. So that being said, the matter is before the commission for further discussion or action.
John Zedrin here.
Mr. Zedrin?
What gives me some problems with staff recommendation here is that, when I heard the staff recommendation or the staff presentation, I felt that the developer did not contact VMRC, kind of did this in the dark, as we've seen a couple of those developments down in Chesapeake, and that it ranged into the egregious category. But here we have professionals that contacted VMRC. We have VMRC staff looking at the plans, saying, "Hey, fine, you got to go ahead. You go on to Corps of Engineers, go to City of Chesapeake, go to all these other agencies, and got all the approvals." And then if we can take the developer side as true, that everything was placed in accordance with the plans, and then because of nature, in this case it was erosion. I mean, what if there was a big hurricane or a tornado or whatever that destroyed whatever it was that was supposed to be there? Then we find the developer liable for this $37,000. I think that's a little bit unfair. The developers stepped forward and said, "Look, we're willing to, pull this stuff back out and replant the vegetation and do the right thing." I don't know what else that the developer could do in this case.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Further comment? Members of the commission?
This is Chad Ballard. I tend to agree with Mr. Zedrin. I do worry that there needs to be some sort of penalty, because we are responsible for how we impact the tidal wetlands, whether it's an accident or whether it's not. There does need to be some sort of impact, but not necessarily to the major degree, because I agree with his kind of finding that there was not a whole lot of intent here.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Further members? Well, any further comment?
This is Dr. Neal. I'm familiar with that cove. I've caught plenty of speckled trout in that cove. I cannot imagine us. I'm sorry.
You didn't cause the erosion, did you?
No, sir. Once they started developing, actually, once they turned off the hotness, we went fishing it.
Yep.
I can't imagine this project the way it's happened. If it came before us, that we would have issued permits to do this. I think we'd have come up with something better, and I think that's the problem. We've got a bunch of rocks and vegetated wetlands that we would not have approved, and so we are talking about an after the fact situation here, and I guess I would like to have some follow up from staff.
Not at this point. I understand the developer would like to speak, but that is not the appropriate rule of order that we have here. Mr. Watkinson, would you like to comment?
Yes, sir. I mean, what you've heard is the fact that we were contacted about some of the work prior to it being done, and we had reviewed some plans. We're just concerned that the material has been placed in marshes or has ended up in the wetlands. The outfall structures are quite extensive into the wetlands. Granted, the toe of the revetment is in the wetlands. It's not the whole thing, but it's hard to tell actually how much was erosion and how much occurred before they put it in, and it ended up being in our jurisdiction to begin with. So we're still quite concerned about the extent of the encroachments, the fact that they ended up in areas that should have been permitted and were not. And so that's really the basis of our concern. It is a large development, a lot of moving parts to it. I understand that they have done a lot of work to address their stormwater requirements and other wetland issues related to maybe non-tidal areas outside of our jurisdiction. But at the end of the day, we ended up with quite a bit of material in the marsh associated with several different structures there, 4 different structures. And as a result, we felt a significant civil charge was appropriate, and that's the reason for our recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, I think what we can beat this all day long, but at the end of the day, I think our responsibility is to ensure that these projects are done according to code and according to the best environmental standards that we possibly can. Throwing the civil charges at them and things like that. And Mr. Cahoon, a question to you directly, and just to answer this question, how many times have you been before the commission?
I began my career in '95, so I'd venture to guess at least once or twice or 3 times a year since then. So a good number, and I trust that the committee knows that we're always looking to try to do it correctly.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you. I guess my point is, I believe in all likelihood that Mr. Cahoon would not have designed this project to suffer the what has occurred at the end of the day, and we need to get this project straightened out. There's no doubt that the wetlands need to be compensated for. They're destroyed. They need the mitigation bank aspect, and I think the 649 square feet of tidal vegetated wetlands ought to be replaced. That's my opinion. I can't make a motion. At the same time, I believe that if we go back to the drawing board and with the after-the-fact application, and maybe to hold the feet to the fire and not approving the pier prior to the completion of the remediation might also be something to be considered. But I'll leave that up to the commission. Matters before the commission for action.
Ed Tankard. I tend to agree with many of your sentiments, Commissioner Bowman. I feel as though the project's been going on for some time. I think people need to be held accountable for doing it correctly. And I see that the limits of the project were pushed perhaps further than they should have been. And so I will make a motion for approval of staff recommendations.
Motion made by Mr. Tankard to approve staff recommendation. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Dr. Neal.
John Ziegler and I have a substitute motion.
Substitute motion by Mr. Zedrin. What was the motion, Mr. Zedrin?
Let me ask staff, what is the total amount of civil charge on the minimum side? Let me have that figure if I can.
That's up to you, sir, but the matrix, I believe, minimum is $1,000. Is that correct?
Commissioner, this is Tony. Yes, if we could go back to one of the slides, we had the matrix up there. There you go.
There it is.
And you have the two axes on your chart here, the degree of impact, and then you have the degree of non-compliance or deviation from the regulatory requirements. So we consider both of those. The minimal amounts on each in the left-hand corner, lower left-hand corner is 1,000 and up to 10,000 as the max in the upper right-hand corner.
All right, so what do we have? Five areas that we're assessing civil penalties on?
4.
Okay. All right. All right. My substitute motion would be is to approve staff recommendation except for the penalty and put the penalty at the $2,000 rate. So that would be $8,000 for the total civil charge. And require, go along with what the commissioner says, that require that that it be restored prior to the other development that the commissioner talked about.
Mr. Watkins, so do we have jurisdiction over the pier at this juncture? We do, don't we? The pier, but we don't have jurisdiction over the...
We have jurisdiction over the part of the pier that goes over the wetlands.
Right.
And to the extent that the pier could affect the wetlands, we do. We don't have jurisdiction relative to submerged land since it's not state-owned bottom in that man-made canal. I would ask for one clarification from Mr. Zedron. He talked about remediation and correction. Are you referring to the channelward extent of the riprap revetment being removed as a restoration component rather than a permit action?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion? Motion fails for lack of a second. We return now to the original motion by Mr. Tankard to approve staff recommendation. Who seconded that motion?
Dr. Neal.
Dr. Neal. The chair will call the roll. Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
No.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Chair reluctantly votes no. Motion, and Ms. Everett abstained. Mr. France is absent. The motion passes 5-2. And now, thank you. I'd like to ask Ms. Block if she would weigh in. Ms. Block, can you now give us the circumstances upon which we now deal?
So if this is to be a consent order, essentially, it has to have the consent of the person who committed the violations. If that person does not consent, then essentially this essentially proposed agreement, let's say, fails, and the commission's options are to take the company to court, at which point they can be subject to a civil penalty not to exceed $25,000 for each day of each violation. And we can seek an injunction to direct them to remove, tear down, or take other steps as are necessary to protect and preserve the subject property of the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Considering that, does the applicant agree to the civil charge of $37,000 at the present time as voted on by the commission and the other actions that were approved? The applicant.
Yes, unfortunately, we have to.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. Greatly appreciate that the record reflect that the applicant has agreed to the staff recommendations. Let's please try to get this project straightened out for the benefit of all. And Ms. Everett would like to make a comment now that this matter is over with. Ms. Everett, the floor is yours.
To you and fellow commissioners as well as staff for not realizing the connection here. My husband worked at Bay Environmental from 2003 to 2008, so left 12 years ago. I was not aware that he worked on this project from anywhere between the 12 and the 17 years ago. I'm now alerted to it, thanks to Mr. Cahoon's noting. I am happy in future, moving forward, to if there's any Bay Environmental project on the agenda, to cross-reference with my husband to see if it's something that he would have worked on at that time frame. It could happen. It obviously happened today, and apologize. I'm surprised very much by myself by it, but again, I will work extra diligently in the future to avoid such a conflict.
Ms. Everett, for the record, your credibility is impeccable. We know that you had nothing to do or no idea. I know you. I've known you for many years. I know full well that had you had any knowledge of this matter, you would have recused yourself immediately. Again, I wish it had come up in a different way. If it's a situation where someone knows that, I again, am very much dismayed with the way the matter was handled, but that's my personal opinion. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item number 7, Rogue Oysters, Oyster Planting Ground, application 2018-157. Who's up?
Ben Stagg, I'll be handling this one.
Mr. Stagg, do you solemnly swear the testimony you'll give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Proceed, please.
So this is an oyster planting ground application that was submitted by Rogue Oyster Companies, LLC. It's application number 2018-157. In that request, they are asking to lease initially approximately 2.2 acres within Greenvale Creek, which is located in Lancaster County. The application is protested by nearby owner. Next slide. So the location is Greenvale Creek, which is in the center of the screen. Next slide. The circle depicts the application area. Next slide, a closer view with aerial photography. Again, next slide. The arrow indicates the application area. As you can see, the mouth of Greenvale Creek is to the south. This is the Rappahannock River, and it's in Lancaster County. There is one other lease currently in Greenvale Creek. We did subject the application to our normal public interest review. We did notify adjacent property owner, and we did receive a protest from Mr. Ron Edwards. I'll cover that a little later. On the application, the applicant did indicate on the use plan questionnaire that the proposed use would be a traditional on-bottom planting and harvesting, and also would propose to put cages on the bottom no greater than 12 inches above the substrate, which would be allowed by regulation. This area does not contain any submerged aquatic vegetation, and therefore would be leasable. It is our understanding that Rogue Oysters actually owns property in the creek nearby, near this application. Next slide. So even closer view here, now the application is shown in red, and there is a lease to the north. Mr. Edwards owns the marina to the south at the mouth of the creek, where you can see the channel coming into the creek. We did receive objection from Mr. Edwards, and he stated as part of his objection his belief that he had a King's grant for a portion of this creek. He did not include any documentation with his initial protest. He did request additional information. We sent him the checklist of items required by the Office of Attorney General to review a King's grant claim. And as of the date of the day, we didn't receive any of those items from the list. We did receive some additional information from Mr. Edwards yesterday, and I have included some of that in the presentation, and we'll address it as we move forward. Next slide. So this slide shows the DDH condemnation area for this creek. The area that is stippled near the mouth is conditionally open. That means it's open certain times of the year and closed at other times. And the area to the north and the strike line is condemned and would therefore require relaying at any time during the year. And our current policy is to not accept for grant application leases within those types of areas. So that explains kind of why you see where the application was stopped. The applicant was aware of that when they applied, and they stayed south of that line. Next slide. Mr. Edwards also indicated that he has had previous leases in the creek, and his predecessor that I think he purchased some of the leases in the marina from, Mr. Conrad, also had a number of leases in the creek, particularly on this side, the western side of the creek. And he also indicated, again, that his belief that he had a King's grant. He indicated that he had given up these leases over time because he was told that they would not be renewed. I don't believe that is correctly characterized what we may have told him. The actual reason the leases went back was non-payment of rent back in 2012 and 2013. Next slide. This is just a note of his objection that we originally received in February of 2019. We've had additional correspondence with Mr. Edwards since then. Next slide. So this is one of the leases that Mr. Edwards had. The other ones you see the name Conrad. This is one that Mr. Edwards actually got on his own and is the one that was reverted for non-payment of rent in 2012. The other leases you see on this plat that are adjacent also have reverted due to lack of payment of rent. By actual termination of the leaseholder. They requested to be terminated. And that happened in 2013. Next slide. This is an older plat, and the reason I put this in the next plat in was to show that in spite of a claim of potential King's grant, that we've been leasing in this creek since actually the 1970s at least. That's as far back as I looked. We may have leases even older than that. But all these leases were active when this plat was made in 1985. And this is generally the same area partially that the applicant has asked for. Next slide. This is another plat from 1987. This one's oriented north, it's to the right instead of straight up the page, but you're basically seeing similar set of leases there that did exist for a number of years, for quite a few decades into the past. Next slide. So here's the conundrum about the King's grant. This is the Lancaster County land map. And it's a little confusing when you look at it because it shows Greenvale Creek to the north, that's the light colored area, Rappahannock to the south, and west, which is the light colored area, and then land as if there is no creek between the upper part of Greenvale Creek and the mouth. Now, this, of course, is just a graphic sort of general representation of the land parcels, and the black box indicates approximately where the lease application is located. Next slide. Mr. Edwards did provide a copy of that map as well as this map. So this is the older version of the land map from years back before they had GPS and GIS. And this is very similar to the one you just saw. It shows on the western side of the creek parcels that are clearly out into the water, some of which are partially on land, one of which, the triangular one, which appears to be completely in the water. Mr. Edwards attests that he has paid taxes on the parcels he owns for the full amount that's probably recorded. That is possible. We have seen this in other places, but to claim a King's grant here, we'd have to see the documentation that clearly showed there was a King's grant of not only the land, but the subaqueous land as well, which is fairly rare, but has on occasions happened. You know,
Mr. Stagg,
yes.
Mr. Stagg, is it not true that we do not have any documentation whatsoever that asserts or properly asserts that he has a King's grant or there is a King's grant located on this lease?
We do not have any such documentation.
Thank you. Proceed.
Next slide. So this is the actual area that we surveyed based on the application. It's a little under the 2.2 acres. We did stay away from the channel because this is a marked channel going into Greenvale Creek. And I believe we buffered off the channel plenty far. I believe Mr. Edwards and potentially another neighbor may speak to the shallow nature of the inshore part of this. They did send me a picture at low tide that showed some areas above mean low water. That looked to me like might have been unusually low tide. But in any event, our commission surveyor surveyed this. We believe that it is channel to mean low water and is leasable. The entire area is south of the polluted line where it's restricted all year long, and therefore the ground would be suitable for leasing. So in summary and recommendation, while Mr. Edwards has made a claim of a King's grant, we do not have any specific information of such a grant. Also, other than the grant claim, he provided no other specific objections to the proposed lease other than the fact that he had had leases there in the past. Staff believes this area of the creek is state-owned subaqueous bottomlands, and the area of the application is currently classified as conditionally approved by the Virginia Department of Health Shellfish Safety Division. Therefore, after reviewing the protestants' objections and considering all the factors in 28.2607 and 28.21205A of the Code of Virginia, we recommend leasing of this 2.0 acre area of bottom to rogue oysters in Greenvale Creek as depicted on the survey dated October 23rd, 2019. I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Any questions by members of the commission for Mr. Stagg? Thank you. Is the applicant present or represented? Here it is. Stand by one.
You can have it.
Okay. Yep, I got it. Taryn, is Taryn Bryce Rowland on? James Rowland on?
Roland Edwards?
No, that would be the protest. That would be the James Rowland present from Rogue Oyster.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
He's unmuted.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
This is James Rowland with Rogue Oysters.
Okay, sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony that you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to speak in reference to your application?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Proceed.
So we have been operating an aquaculture operation for a few years now. We operate out of Greenville Marina, which is just north of the applied for area. We do have area outside of the creek in the main branch of the Rappahannock. The point of the creek application is that the creek is fairly well protected from weather. We can't get out every day into the river, and it has interrupted some harvest activity. Since this will be just at least as things stand, more or less open in the winter, the idea is to bring in some harvest size oysters, store them in this area, and in the event of poor weather, we would still have fairly easy access to those oysters, and it would make operations run a little more smoothly. Summertime access to this, of course, it would be condemned for harvest. There is the potential for possibly the use for placing some stuff out of our nursery that is within seed size on the way out, also to avoid basically storm activity. Our summer use would be extremely limited as of right now. Mr. Conrad, that was mentioned, does have shoreline peeler traps he uses in the summer, and this is a shallow area, so placement of that while he's working the area wouldn't really be appropriate. Most of the area that we would use would be the more near shore area, that is the deeper area. The channelward area is extremely shallow. During particularly the winter at extreme low tides, some of that is visible. We would obviously not use that to have the oysters exposed to the air during winter. So generally, we think the near shore area would be the place we would be placing stuff over the winter when we bring it in. And with that, I'm here for any questions.
Any questions by members of the commission for Mr. Rowland? Thank you. Mr. Rowland, is your wife present that wishes to speak as well, or are you handling it?
She could be made available, but I'm handling it unless you specifically need her for anything.
No, sir, she was on the list. We just want to make sure that everyone that wishes to speak has an opportunity to speak. That's
I do appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right. Anyone else in support of this project? Anyone in opposition? Mr. Edwards, you present? Mr. Edwards?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you'll give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Proceed, please.
To start with, I'd like to clear up a few things that was said previously. That my main contention was King's Grant. Obviously, that hasn't been researched enough to have that legal opinion yet. However, I'm sitting on a legal survey, and it's dated 1962, 71, 87, 93. And it encompasses, it's on legal deed book 128, page 237, as a legal survey for this piece of property. And it shows from parcel 22 that the owner of that property, parcel 22, which would be me, it shows ownership past low water mark out to the channel and all the way up to parcel 25.
Are you asserting then that the argument of a King's Grant in this area?
No, I'm asserting what's a legal survey, sir. And I'm also.
Okay. Are you asserting that you own the property that the Commonwealth of Virginia is attempting to lease?
According to this legal survey that's recorded at the courthouse, And Lancaster County recognizes my ownership because I've been paying taxes on it on the bottom since the day I bought it.
Well, sir, that's something that you should submit pursuant to the checklist that was provided to you so that our Attorney General's representative could review it and accordingly advise the commission as it relates to jurisdiction in this matter.
Oh,
Without
but we
having,
did.
sir, just a minute. Without having that at our avail, we have nothing to go on other than
Excuse
the map.
me. Excuse me.
Sir, I'm chairing this meeting. You're not. Please wait until I complete, until I finish. Unless we have that at our avail to make a fair review of the matter, we have to deal with what we have at our avail, and that's what Mr. Stagg has provided, and that's what's before the commission today. Now, sir, you may proceed.
Well, I hope I can clear this up because, but we did provide it. Miss Tina Phillips sent all this information to Mr. Staggs.
And he presented it today.
And to present today at your avail.
And it was on his slideshow.
Ma'am, sir, there's an echo in the back. If that other person's going to testify, I need to know who it is, and I need to swear her in. Otherwise, it's very disruptive to the meeting.
All right, you want to swear her in then?
If she wishes to speak.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Could you state your name, please?
Tina Phillips.
Ms. Phillips, do you solemnly swear the testimony that you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed and tell us what you've got to say.
Well, the question was the survey that would be available, and it is the one that Mr. Stagg presented in his presentation. That is the survey Mr. Edwards is referring to.
Okay, we understand that now, but at the same time, it does not clarify the King's Grant or the ownership issue based on what we have.
Well, that's what he was saying, the ownership issue, because that's what's deeded to him. And since that is very extremely shallow ground that the applicant identified as well.
Okay.
Survey.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Who am I talking to?
You're talking to Commissioner Steve Bowman?
Mr. Bowman.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Okay. One other. I want to just finish that one issue by saying I've been paying tax on this bottom land, and that ought to give me some kind of privilege or advantage. Otherwise, why would the county be charging me money for something I can't use? And another thing, once upon a time, there used to be a channel that hugged this shore. If Rogue's Oysters covers this channel up, it's no way in the world I could get a boat up through that shoreline to do whatever work on my land that I needed to do. Suppose we needed to put a pier or a dock or a bulkhead out there. I would not be able to get a barge or anything else up in there if he's got it blocked with his oyster cages. I realize what he's trying to do, but I've also got some needs myself. And since I own the property, I ought to be able to use it. And this is going to block any kind of use for those kind of issues, or even down the road, even recreational. Or down the road, if I wanted with a joint permit application, if I wanted to dredge this area to put in other things, how would I be able to do that?
Ms. Block, could you respond to that for me, please? This is the Attorney General's representative, Ms. Block.
Yes. So in terms of the logistics of barges and dredging, I mean, I'm going to set that aside for a minute. The issue of the deed and the taxes, generally, deeds that show ownership or encompass below mean low water are presumed to not convey ownership below mean low water. Now, I have not looked at this particular deed. I have not reviewed it. So I can't say for certain that this one does not. But typically, the only way that you can get ownership of submerged bottomland against the Commonwealth is by a King's Grant or a Queen's Grant that can be traced in an unbroken chain of title back to the King or the Queen. So I don't, without having reviewed the title chain or this particular survey, the mere fact that a survey exists or that the county is requiring you to pay taxes does not necessarily show ownership of that area.
And Ms. Block, is it not true that we have seen surveys before that actually extended below the low water mark, which for whatever reason the surveyor decided to do that, at times it would falsely demonstrate ownership below the low water mark when in fact the Commonwealth of Virginia is a low water mark state? Is that correct?
Yes, and I mean there's a lot of very complicated ancient legal things that happened after the Revolutionary War to transfer ownership and all of that. But we have seen that before, that surveyors, for whatever reason, survey out below mean low water, and we've seen counties assess taxes below mean low water without that indicating ownership. Now, that could be something to take to the county about why you're paying taxes on that, and that could be something to look at in terms of, does this indicate a chain of title that would grant ownership? But the mere fact that there's a survey is not end all be all that there's ownership over submerged bottom.
And one further question to you. If Mr. Edwards were able to provide title that indicated that there is a King's Grant in this location, would it not be the responsibility of the Commonwealth of Virginia to basically rescind any lease over that bottom land, and Mr. Edwards would have sole use of that bottom at that point of proof? Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards or Ms. Phillips, did you have any further?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, it's been stated before. I let this lease go for non-payment. At the time, I was getting 2011, 2012 approximately. I had to have both of my knees replaced. So the restaurant had been closed. I closed the restaurant down when Army Corps of Engineers came in and dredged the channel, and 50% of our business in the summer was boat traffic. And I expressed concern while they were doing this, and they promptly told me, we're engineers, we know what we're doing. I said, you're putting this up on shore, the dredge material unencapsulated. I said, it's not going to stay there very long, probably end up in the same ditch it came from. And it turned out that was true. Within the dredge supervisor that was doing the dredging, company out of Delaware, said, I wouldn't give this project a year before all this money, what a waste of money, all this sand is going to end up in the same ditch where it came from. Well, he was right. In fact, he was overright. It filled up to my level of my docks where these boats came in and tied up. And in some places, over top of it. I can show you pictures right now. Can you see my face?
No, sir, we don't have that capability.
Well, it's too bad because I can show you pictures of exactly what I'm saying. Anyway, I know I'm getting off the point a little bit, but while I was either having this surgery done or convalescing, I did so up at where I grew up at, 303 Deacon Road, Fredericksburg, Virginia. It's actually in Stafford County, but Fredericksburg address. Meantime, the mail was coming to the restaurant, and I didn't get good service. I didn't get a copy of those bills, and I don't know if I could have paid them not. I was basically out of money, but this time when it was happening.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, by the time that I got around to trying to renew my leases, the gentleman at VMRC said, Mr. Edwards, we're not renewing those leases because the whole creek has been condemned bacterially. I think they sent a boat up there twice a month to take water samples. Well, I got my address changed so you guys had a place to better service to send me notices on. The next notice I got from you guys was a notice that Rogue Oysters had applied, and unless any protest was going on, that you were going to approve his interest in leasing this property, this bottomland that fronted my property above the mean low water mark. So I immediately called up and I said, I never got any notice that you were trying to, that anyone, including me, could lease this property. And I said I should have first right of refusal since, number one, I'm the shore landowner. I pay taxes on it, number two. And number three, I was never notified that it was up for lease again, that you had removed that condemnation or that where the water was condemned. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
To even apply for it. It was a done deal before I knew about it.
Well,
I don't blame Rogue Oysters. If I was them, I would have done the same thing myself, probably. But I never got the opportunity.
Sir, just a matter of clarification. Number one, the Virginia Marine Resources Commission does not condemn the waters of the Commonwealth of Virginia as far as take a shellfish is concerned. The Virginia Department of Health takes care of that. Number two, these condemnations can change based on a number of factors, whether the fecal coliform level has gone down, whether certain other things have occurred. You have seasonal condemnations around marinas due to boat traffic and things like that, but that we do not handle that. We just receive that information from the Virginia Department of Health. Okay, and as far as and as far as it being a done matter, it's not a done matter until this commission votes this morning. So, with that, can you wrap up, because we've been going on a good time as far as this case is concerned, please.
I'll try to speed it right along. All I'm saying is I never got proper notice that I could reapply or I could renew my former lease. And if I'd have known, I would have. We're only talking about a small amount of money, so.
Well, as far as that's concerned, all leases that become available are posted on our website. You can look at them. Everyone in the Commonwealth of Virginia that's available is there. We'll give you the status of the lease and what's available, what's under lease, what's under protest, and things like that. So we try to do our very best to get that out there. So,
Unfortunately,
yes,
I didn't have a computer back then.
yes, sir. Understand. Any questions by members of the commission for Mr. Edwards? They're being done. Mr. Rowland, you've got 2 minutes to wrap up if you'd like to respond to anything that's been said.
Sir, thank you. I suppose briefly, as Mr. Edwards brought up the old channel, he is correct, at least as far as my conversations with Mr. Conrad, who uses the area. The old channel did follow the shoreline there, which is why I applied for that area. It does have a little better depth to keep cages submerged. It is not currently used for boat traffic since the new channel runs up the creek. Also due to the nature of the area being rather shallow, boat traffic is not a thing in that area. But that is true. The old channel was there, and that is why I'm on that side. With regard to his potential use of developing that area and how the lease could impact that, I honestly don't have answers or responses to that. So other than that, I really just am here for any questions.
Any questions by members of the commission? Thank you, sir. Seeing none, the matters before the commission for discussion and action.
I move that we approve staff recommendation. Chad Ballard.
Motion made by Mr. Ballard to approve staff recommendations. Is there a second to the motion?
Second, Heather Lusk.
Seconded by Ms. Lusk. Further discussion? Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin? Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
The caution, Rogue Oysters is a member of the Chesapeake Oyster Alliance, so just to be safe, I'll go ahead and abstain on this one.
Okay. Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for presentation on both sides. Next item is item 8, discussion United States Army Corps of Engineers Norfolk District request acceptance of a MOU. You may remember we had a subcommittee that was assigned to this. Mr. Watkinson, are you handling this matter?
Yes, sir. I'll handle this. Of course, as you indicated, this has been tabled from the January meeting where we first presented this. This is a request from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to accept a memorandum of agreement to protect subaqueous ecosystem restoration project sites on state-owned submerged lands within the Lynnhaven River watershed. During the discussion in January, there were some questions about the memorandum of agreement and the commitments that the agreement required of the commission. So you asked Associate Member Ballard and Associate Member Zedron to sit on a subcommittee to evaluate any potential changes to the MOU. And we did meet and discuss the matter by telephone during a conference call in early February with the Corps of Engineers to try and identify some changes. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, as I said, this is intended to address the Lynnhaven River restoration projects that the Corps of Engineers and the City of Virginia Beach are undertaking. We have, as a commission, approved a project for SAV restoration and then a hard substrate restoration project as well. The Corps has indicated that working with their local sponsor, which is the City of Virginia Beach, there needed to be some mechanisms to serve to protect these areas. And normally, if they're working on land, they would have property transfers or whatnot to secure the property. In this case, the projects are on state-owned submerged lands. And under state code pursuant to 28.2/1200.1. These simple interest in state submerged lands cannot be conveyed. So the Corps identified in working with staff the use of an MOU to satisfy their legal requirements for some property protection. If I could go on to the next slide, please. At the January commission meeting, we went over briefly these stipulations for the commission relative to the MOU. What you see here is the revised version with the corrections offered by the Corps of Engineers. And so you see that in item 3, in particular, there was some question about reasonable distances. And so they've defined a distance of 100 feet. There had been some concern in item 4 about, how that would be implemented. And so the Corps recognized that they have certain regulatory authority over permitting projects in and around their restoration sites as well. And so item 4 was amended to recognize that authority that the Corps has, and that the commission wouldn't permit anything unless the Corps had authorized it subject to their authority. And there was some question about item 5 and how that would be implemented, and that was just struck from the agreement. So with that, if we go to the next slide, here you see the responsibilities of the commission relative to the MOU as it exists now. So we believe that it's appropriate in this situation to execute the MOU to serve as the protection mechanism the Corps needs to move forward with their projects, and that the way in which we would implement this is appropriate, and we don't think it would be a major conflict with future projects that might be in the area, and this identifies ways to deal with those. So with that, I'll leave it at that and just try to answer any questions you might have. I know some folks from the Corps of Engineers were planning to be on the call, and hopefully they are available for any questions or comment as well.
Okay. Well, let's do this. First, I'd like to hear from the two individuals that were kind enough to sit on the subcommittee, Mr. Ballard and Mr. Zedran. Mr. Ballard, I think you're the one that had the concerns to begin with. Can you, would you like to add anything to it, or?
I think Tony laid out exactly kind of the changes we made. I think the calls were very fruitful, and my concerns were addressed, and I believe Mr. Zedran's were as well, but I'll let him speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Mr. Zedran, any comments, sir?
We worked on this thing a couple different times, had everybody on the phone, and I think it came out to be an excellent document, so I agree with it.
All right, sir, thank you. Who's from the Corps that wishes to be heard, if anyone, at this juncture? Ms. Kolch, Kimberly?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Commissioner Bowman and commission members. This is Kimberly Kelch. I'm project manager with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear the testimony that you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Proceed, please.
All right. At this time, we respectfully request the approval of the Memorandum of Understanding for the ecosystem land use that has been coordinated with the staff and all three organizations. Although we do have that lease and permit in place for these activities, this document speaks to the long-term intent of the organizations to protect these areas for restoration over the long term. And also it will help us with the Army Corps, our headquarters, to have assurance that all three of the organizations are in sync. I stand ready to answer your questions, and I know we also have our Office of Counsel on the line, as well as the City of Virginia Beach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard before we put before the commission? Okay. Although this may not be a public hearing, I'm going to consider it a public hearing to make sure we cover all the bases. Is there anyone in the public wishes to be heard on this matter, pro or con, for or against? There being none, the matter is before the commission.
This is Dr. Neal. First, I'd just like to thank Chad and John for their work on this. And I would move that we approve this MOU.
Motion made by Dr. Neal to approve. Is there a second?
So moved, Ed Tankard.
Thank you, Mr. Tankard. Now for the vote. Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin? Thank you. Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. I'd like to thank everyone for their hard work on this matter. It's one of those situations that shows that I think the public sometimes thinks when we have issues like this that are of this matter, we just basically rubber stamp them. I think this shows that from all sides we did due diligence to make sure we came up with a good product. I also would like to thank Mr. Zedrin and Mr. Ballard for their work on it, and we look forward to a long and healthy working relationship with the City of Virginia Beach and the Corps of Engineers and all involved in the Lynn Haven River watershed. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is public comments. This is an opportunity for those to speak on matters that are not listed on the agenda. Is there anyone that wishes to be heard in public comment?
Philip Burris.
Hi, this is Adrienne Catula, Kotula. Birth date is 7/30/81.
Okay, Ms. Catula, please proceed. Good to have you on board. Ms. Catula, did you wish to be heard? Okay. Just so that everybody understands, I understand there's some individuals that wish to be heard about cobia permit ineligibility. If this is on your mind and you wish to be heard, this is the time to bring this up.
So you want to talk now?
Yeah.
Okay. Unmute Philip.
Philip Burris.
Mr. Burris, go ahead, sir.
How you doing today?
I'm well, sir.
All right, y'all can hear me good. Yeah, it's off matter, and I'm just gonna tell y'all an honest mistake and admit to it, and I was in the wrong. But for my recreational cobia permit, the number 4 is 9907, and for my commercial hook and line and waterman card and everything, that number is 9907 also. So when I do my monthly mandatory reporting for cobia and everything else, I send it in every month and use everything on 9907. But for the recreational side, I did not report nothing because I thought it all went to the same place since the number is 9907. So I didn't fill out nothing out because not going at all because I fill it out monthly on a commercial side. So I just got confused, and this year I'm not eligible to get a recreational cobia permit, and I would like to get one in case I do decide to go for fun or take my family or something.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about, though?
I do exactly. Yes, sir.
And like I said, go ahead.
No, for the record, this matter is being held pursuant to Section 28.2.216 of the Code of Virginia. It's considered a formal hearing. So you can continue.
All Yeah, like I said, it was like I didn't do that. I did not report nothing on a recreational side to break rules or anything. I just thought it was all going to the same place when I was registering on a commercial side with my same number 9907. So it was, like I said, my fault for being dumb and not catching it, or not reading everything correctly. That's my fault, but
I put a can of corned beef hash in. I don't know what the fuck I did with it.
All right. Thank
and,
you. Yes, sir.
I would like to see if I know I've talked to a few people on there in the last couple of months about it. I'd like to see if there's any forgiveness on, so I could get a recreational code permit. So,
for the record, Mr. Burris, we last year had significant forgiveness as far as the matter is concerned. This year, we have had a zero tolerance as far as this is concerned. We require the commercial fishery, as you well know, as a commercial fisherman, to report. And if we don't require the recreational from folks to report as they should, and for the record, last year, 5,373 people reported correctly. So this is a formal hearing. I will put it before the commission and see if they wish to take the matter up. But it has been the policy here at the Marine Resources Commission not to issue any exceptions to this matter this year to anyone for any reason. So unfortunately, we do not like to operate in a manner such as this. We want compliance, voluntary compliance, but there has not been anyone that has been issued a permit at this juncture for any exception whatsoever. So with that, I'll ask the commission if they wish to take up the matter. I'll ask the commission if they wish to take up the matter. Mr. Burris, the commission denies taking up your matter today, and unfortunately, your request is denied. We thank you for calling and telling us, sharing your case with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gilbert, I have you on the line as wishing to be heard.
I'm you folks, Steve. I don't see Mr. Gilbert on the line.
Mr. Gilbert. Mr. Gilbert comes not. Anyone else wish to be heard in matters of public comment today? Seeing none, the next item on the agenda is item number 10, recommendation, funding for river herring sampling and boat scarring projects for the Virginia Marine Fishing Improvement Fund. Who has this one? Alicia, is that you?
Yes. This is Alicia Nelson.
Okay, and this does not require you to be sworn in, so please let us know what you have.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, or almost good afternoon. This item includes two funding requests to our license funds, one for supplemental river herring funding and the other for our annual boat scarring funding. Next slide, please. You would typically hear both of these projects separately in early spring. However, due to this year's closures, they were delayed. Both are reoccurring expenditures to our commercial and recreational license funds. There's nothing new here that hasn't been previously reviewed for either of these projects. Next slide. Our river herring sampling in Virginia is part of a larger federally funded sportfish restoration project for American shad and river herring. And in 2014, it was realized that with some added efficiencies, we could add river herring sampling to our existing shad monitoring by adding supplemental funding for staff time. Those combined efforts help us to meet our F&P Fisheries Management Plan mandates for river herring as well as American shad with this one project. And this is a $40,000 request from our commercial license fund only. Next slide, please. The other is our boat scarring project for SAV. So each year, Dr. Orth of VIMS updates the commission on the long-term research and monitoring programs focused on submerged aquatic vegetation at VIMS. Part of this briefing includes the detailed report on their annual boat scarring program, which is designed to prevent extensive SAV damage from boater activities, both commercial and recreational. At the end of that briefing each year, Dr. Orth requests their annual funding for the program, which is $22,000, split funded equally between our commercial and recreational license program. I do want to note that Dr. Orth still plans to update the commission on the 2019 program when he's able. However, staff is requesting funding now to prevent any funding disruption for this program. Next slide. So our available funds for both of our license funds are displayed. There's $640,000 currently available for projects from our commercial license fund or the Marine Fishing Improvement Fund, and about $2.2 million from our Virginia Saltwater Recreational Fishing Development Fund. I do want to note that we still are planning on continuing our grant review cycle for 2020, and we do expect to complete that this year as well. And I would also like to note that project work for both of these projects is ongoing to the maximum extent possible given the circumstances this year. There has been no disruptions yet due to funding, and they are going along as best as they possibly can with the COVID restrictions. Next slide. So our staff recommendation is approving expenditures totaling $51,000 from the Marine Fishing Improvement Fund and $11,000 from the Virginia Saltwater Recreational Fishing Development Fund. That breaks down to the $40,000 expenditure from the Commercial License Fund only for river herring, and a split funding from $11,000 from each fund for boat scarring. And that completes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Always good to hear from you. Is there any questions for Alicia by members of the commission? Hearing none, this is a public hearing. Does anyone wish to be heard on this matter, pro or con? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
Dr. Neal, move to approve staff recommendation.
Is there a second to the motion?
So moved, Ed Tankard.
Okay. Mr. Tankard, thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. France being absent. Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin? Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Thank you. Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Alicia. Alicia, I have one question for you before we go.
Yes.
Still there?
Yes.
When is the last time law enforcement asked for any funds from the Saltwater Recreational Fund? Do you know?
There is an annual allotment. I would have to look up to see the last time there was a specific request for a specific item, but there is an annual expenditure on the fund for law enforcement.
Could you please do that? We were very hopeful that we would receive some much needed equipment, and it's not a whole lot, believe it or not. It's some motors. Can you look and find and send me a report advising when the last time we made a specific equipment request from a law enforcement perspective, and let me know that. As we well know, we never ask through there unless we really need it, but things have gone from looking like they were going to be really, really good to somewhat difficult. So that, and also from the commercial fund as well, since we handle both, I think it would be appropriate if they do make that request that it be prorated based on percentage of income available and income expended. So if you could do that for me, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is item number 11, blue crab fishery. Mr. Gear, do you have that?
That's Alexa, and she's going to be doing 11.
Alexa?
That'll be Ms. Kretsch.
Ms. Kresh, Alexa Kresh, please proceed.
And I will actually be taking up items 11 and 12 together, both relating to the blue crab.
That will be fine, ma'am. Thank you.
So
proceed.
this This is a public hearing, proposal to amend chapters 4 VAC 20-270 pertaining to blue crab fishery and 4 VAC 20-1140 prohibition of crab dredging in Virginia waters to establish management provisions for the July 5th, 2020 through July 4th, 2021 blue crab fisheries. Next slide, please. The commissioners saw in my presentation last month the results of the 2020 winter dredge survey. You can see that 2020 was a decrease from 2019 and was also below average. Next slide. Our juvenile abundance was also a decrease and also below average. Next slide. However, our adult female abundance is still within a healthy range, although not yet at the target. Next slide. And our exploitation rate, our what percentage of the female population was harvested in a year, is below target. So we have some cushion room with the harvest rate. So looking at both of those aspects, that abundance is lower, but our harvest rate is still healthy, we recommend status quo for the blue crab fisheries for the 2020-2021 season. And we do set the regulations every year, starting from July 5th, of a year to July 4th of the following year. So status quo would reflect the same regulations we had in the 2019 to 2020 season. These graphs were also presented to the Blue Crab Management Advisory Committee, and the members voted unanimously to support status quo with the option of revisiting this at a fall meeting. Next slide. Every year, we also look at the winter dredge fishery. Historically, a winter dredge season was open from December 1st through March 31st. But a report of the Winter Crab Dredge Fishery Task Force found that the winter dredge season can harvest 32% of female crabs that are in the bay at the start of the season. So that is after a year's harvest. And that 96% of the dredge harvest is female, which is the aspect of the population we are most trying to conserve. So this dredge fishery was closed in 2008 as part of the 34% reduction in effort and the new emphasis on conserving female crabs after the blue crab fishery disaster. So the commission must vote each year to close winter dredge season. Each year a closure is recommended. Next slide. So we'll go through the regulations. In Chapter 4 VAC 20-270, daily time limits, we've added to clarify, those are daily time limits for commercial harvest. And these are just some language changes from individuals to licensed crab pot or peeler pot fishermen to be more in line with the rest of the regulation. And to remove the time qualifier of after January 1, 2012. Next slide. For the remainder of this regulation, all changes are just to update the years from 2019 to 2020 and 2020 to 2021 to reflect the status quo carried forward to this season. So this is in Chapter 40, season limits. Next slide. Section 51, daily commercial harvester, vessel, and harvest and possession limits. Next slide. Again in section 51. Next slide. And then again in Chapter 4 VAC 20-1140 for crab dredging prohibited, updating the season to the 2020 to 2021 season. Next slide. Staff recommends the commission approve these amendments to Chapters 4 VAC 20-270 pertaining to blue crab fishery and 4 VAC 20-1140 prohibition of crab dredging in Virginia waters to establish management provisions for the July 5th, 2020 through July 4th, 2021 blue crab fisheries. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions by members of the commission for Ms. Kresh? Thank you, Alexa. Great presentation. Any questions by the commission? If not, this is a public hearing on the blue crab regulations. We will be taking these items one at a time. So this public hearing pertains to item number 11 pertaining to blue crab fishery. Anyone in the public wish to be heard on the matter? They are hearing none. The matter is before the commission for discussion and action.
I believe that Alexa's done a great job of encapsulating all that we need to do. I think we should move forward with this staff recommendation. Ed Tankard.
Thank you, Mr. Tankard. Is there a second to the motion?
Second, Chad Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Thank you. Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item before the commission for discussion as action is the winter dredge fishery. As Ms. Kresh indicated, the Code of Virginia and the courts require us to vote every year on this season, and that's why this matter is before you. Those of us that have been on the commission for a long time know how important it is to manage in the management, overall management of the crab fishery, to advocate to keep this fishery closed. The first time that I ever saw the presentation by the Virginia Institute of Marine Science after 1 year of closure demonstrated the proliferation of crabs throughout the Chesapeake Bay where we had not seen them for many, many years. And the fruits of our work after about 3 years off paid off significantly where we went from collapse to a very sustainable fishery. So this vote is very important. Matter before the commission for action.
Ed Tankard, I move that we approve the closing this fishery again for the coming year.
Thank you, Mr. Tankard. Is there a second?
I'll second it. My only question is, did you actually accept public comment on this?
Oh, you know what? I did initially, but I will, thank you so much. I will, Mr. Tankard, can you withdraw your motion for just a second, just to make sure I get this perfectly?
I certainly can. I think it's important to hear from Andy.
Absolutely. This matters before the commission or before the public to be heard. Does anyone wish to be heard on item 12, for or against?
Hello, yes, I'd like to be heard.
Yes, sir. Can you state your name? Can you state your name, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. State your name, please.
Jeffrey Damron.
Hi, Jennifer.
Yes, sir.
My name is also Jennifer. I called you.
You still on here, Commissioner?
Yes, sir, we are. Mr. Damron, proceed, please.
Sir, I'm very savvy with this. I'm representing the crab just of Chesapeake Bay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Proceed, please.
And we would like to get this drudge fishery reopened this year. It's 12 years. And, you know, we feel like if your numbers are high enough for it to be a healthy fishery, then we need to be able to go back to work. And if they're not healthy enough for us to go back to work, then drudging wasn't the problem all along. And, you know, I want to be heard on this matter. And we know that it pretty much rubber stamped and blamed on us. But at one time, it was 400 boats in this fishery, and it probably wouldn't be over 30 of us left that would be harvesting crabs. And it's really detrimental to us. People have lost their homes, their boats, their families, and everything else over this with nothing to do for 4 months out of the year. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. And we have been talking to council, and we know we have 30 days to appeal this with the courts. When it went to court in 2008, the Judge Doyle said that y'all had the authority to regulate it, but you couldn't take it off the books. Well, essentially, that's what you do every year, is take it off the books. And we will be going to court this year if y'all decide to close it. Because, you know, everybody's just going to run out of time and be dead by the time this season's over. And as far as us targeting female crabs, we're not targeting female crabs any more than crab potters do the spring and the fall. Everything that's caught in the bay is females just about. You know, you're still allowing peeler potters to target immature crabs. You're still allowing sponge crabbing to go on, and they're targeting visibly pregnant female crabs. You know, we're not trying to get anybody shut down, but that's what's going on. It's the only fishery in the world that targets visibly pregnant female crabs. And we don't think it's right that we've took 100% of the cutbacks in this state for the last 12 years. And it's a lot going on with this. We just thought you ought to know. And I talked
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
to Mr. Edwards up here in Wacomico Church, Virginia, and he somehow or another represents the Black Lives Matter movement. And he's concerned, I talked to him just yesterday about just affecting minorities in this area, this close, you know, basically in the picking house area where crab pickers made of the population that was closed down, and it was no economic impact study done in 2008, and it hasn't been an economic impact study done ever since. And they just feel that it's disproportionately affecting the community, and they would be looking at the vote today. So that's the word I had with him yesterday. So I don't know what that anyway, but that's where we're at. I've talked about crab judges, and we have counsel, and he wanted us to come before the board today and just give that to you and let you know where we stand, and that's what it is. We feel like that, you know, when you got this disaster relief money in 2008, you paid high as $150,000 for crab pot license. And the crab judges were not ever offered anything. Our license was just taken, which made them worthless. And y'all's VMRC website sells every kind of license that it is. Y'all are promoting the sale of any kind of crab license that it is, but our license is useless. So we feel like they got $150,000. Y'all need to pay us $150,000 for our license if you're going to continue to do away with this every year. And that's pretty much what I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damron. Anyone else wish to be heard for or against the blue crab dredge fishery, winter dredge fishery? Thank you. Now the matter is before the commission for action.
I move that we approve staff recommendation, add Tankard.
Motion made by Mr. Tankard. Is there a second to the motion?
And I'll second the motion, Dr. Neal.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett? Ms. Everett?
Aye. Sorry, I've been saying aye, but I was muted.
Okay, I'm
Aye.
sorry. We're still working on
Okay.
this. Chair votes
it's okay.
aye.
I'm calling.
That's okay. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is public hearing pertaining to bluefish, establishing the commercial bluefish annual quota for 2020. Who has that one?
Good morning, it's Olivia Phillips.
Olivia? Okay, state your name for the record, please.
Olivia Phillips.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Could you proceed, please?
Yep. Good morning, early afternoon, Commissioner and members of the Commission. This is a public hearing to amend Chapter 4 VAC 20-450 pertaining to the taking of bluefish to establish the commercial bluefish fishery quota for 2020. Next, please. The Atlantic Coast stock of bluefish are jointly managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council. Annual quotas are projected and updated each year following an annual operational stock assessment update. In August 2019, the results of the operational stock assessment found that bluefish were overfished, but overfishing was not occurring. As a result, during the meeting in October 2019, the Council and ASMFC adopted coast-wide catch and landings limits for the 2020 commercial bluefish fishery. They set the coast-wide commercial catch limit to 2.77 million pounds, which is a 64% decrease compared to 2019. Staff is aware that a 64% decrease sounds large, but if we go to the next slide. Virginia is unlikely to be hugely affected by the decrease because we don't generally land anywhere near our quota, which is illustrated by this figure. So here the blue bars represent the landings in pounds, and the orange line represents Virginia's quota from 2009 to 2019. And you'll note that the landings don't generally come near the annual quota. And from over this time period, the percent of bluefish quota achieved in Virginia has ranged from 10% in 2018 to 52% in 2016. Next slide, please. On May 11th, 2020, NOAA released the 2020 proposed commercial bluefish quota of 2.7 million pounds coastwide for public comment. When NOAA publishes their final rule, Virginia will receive 11.8795% of the coastwide quota, roughly 329,000 pounds. This quota setting process occurs annually where the Council and ASMFC establish the quota and then NOAA sets the final rule. So every year, Virginia receives that same percent allocation of 11.8795% of the coastwide commercial quota. And as a result, staff has removed the quota poundage number and replaced it with Virginia's percent allocation to increase regulatory efficiency and expediency when NOAA publishes their final rule each year. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, staff wanted to take this opportunity to inform the Commissioner and members of the Commission of pending management action for bluefish. There is a pending amendment which will reevaluate the bluefish FMP. The goal is to rebuild the bluefish stock, avoid overages, achieve optimum yield, prevent overfishing, and reduce the need for quota transfers off the U.S. East Coast. There are 6 items being discussed, but the 2 main ones are listed here. So the first is the commercial and recreational sector allocations are being reviewed. Currently, the commercial sector receives 17% of the allocation and the recreational sector receives 83%. And they're looking to revise the allocation percentages based on modified base years or different data sets. And then the second big item is they're considering commercial allocation or reallocating the commercial quota to each state. So moving forward, we can expect the development of public hearing documents and hearing schedule in the fall of 2020. The public hearings will be held sometime in December 2020. The proposed rule should be available fall 2021, and then the final rule will follow that in the winter of 2021. Next slide, please. So moving into the current regulatory changes, in section 15 of chapter 4 VAC 20-450, we added the definition for annual quota, which reads annual quota means Virginia's 11.8795% share of the annual coastwide commercial bluefish quota managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Next slide, please. For section 20, we just revised the title to clarify that section 20 is the recreational bluefish possession limits. Next slide, please. And then here we added the language specific to the annual quota in section 30, commercial landings quota. So subsection A now reads, the commercial landings of bluefish shall be limited to the annual quota except as specified in subsection B of this section. And then subsection B reads, if a quota transfer occurs between Virginia and another state participating in the Interstate Fishery Management Plan for bluefish, Virginia's annual quota for the current calendar year shall be limited to the annual quota amount as adjusted for transfers. Next slide, please. Staff recommends the Commission approve amendments to Chapter 4 VAC 20-450 pertaining to the taking of bluefish to establish the commercial bluefish quota for 2020 using Virginia's percent allocation of 11.8795% of the coastwide commercial bluefish quota. And with that, I can take any questions.
Olivia, thank you for the presentation. Does any member of the Commission have any questions for Ms. Phillips? Thank you. Any member of the public wish to be heard on this matter for or against staff recommendations? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion.
Dr. Neal, move to accept staff recommendation.
Dr. Neal?
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. Is there a second to the motion?
So moved, Ed Tankard.
Second by Mr. Tankard. Further discussion on the motion? Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. The next item on the agenda pertains to taking of sharks. Who has that one?
It's me.
It would be Ms. Mattson. Proceed, Ms. Madison. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. Good morning, Commissioners. This is a public hearing on a proposal to amend Chapter 4 VAC 20-490 pertaining to sharks to establish the commercial spiny dogfish annual quota for the 2020 fishing year using Virginia's percent allocation of the coastwide commercial spiny dogfish quota, as well as to require the use of non-offset, non-stainless steel circle hooks when fishing for sharks recreationally, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures. Next slide, please. So there are two issues before the Commission, the first being setting the spiny dogfish quota. So on October 25th of 2018, ASMSC established the 2019 through 2021 fishing year specifications for spiny dogfish. Just as a reminder, for spiny dogfish, the fishing year actually runs through May 1st of the current calendar year through April 30th of the following calendar year. On May 15th, on 2019, NOAA issued the final rule specifications for the 2019 fishing year, as well as the projected specifications for fishing years 2020 and 2021. This year, March 6th, the coastwide commercial quota for 2020 was released. So for 2020, the coastwide commercial quota is approximately 23 million pounds. Next slide, please. So Virginia's total allocation for 2020 is approximately 2.5 million pounds. This is actually a 13% increase from the 2019 fishing year quota. The chart that you see before you is just outlining the fishing years, as well as all of the regions and states that participate in the Interstate Fisheries Management Plan for spiny dogfish. Next slide, please. So spiny dogfish are jointly managed by the Mid-Atlantic Council as well as the Northeast Fisheries Management Council and ASMSC. ASMSC establishes the specifications and NOAA sets the final rules yearly. Virginia receives 10.795% of the coastwide commercial allocation. What we've done, like you've seen for bluefish, and actually at the last hearing for black sea bass, staff has removed the quota poundage number and replaced that with Virginia's percent allocation. And like Olivia just mentioned, we expect that this increases our regulatory efficiency and expediency. So when NOAA publishes their final rule, we already have that written into our regulations. Next slide, please. So issue number 2 that's before you is pertaining to sharks and circle hooks. So the background here is that ASMSC has established language in the Coastal Sharks Fisheries Management Plan that requires that recreational anglers use non-offset, non-stainless steel circle hooks when fishing for sharks, except when they're fishing with flies or artificial lures. ASMSC has set a compliance date for this of July 1st, 2020. And these measures are consistent with those already required for federal highly migratory species permit holders under that HMS Amendment 11. Next slide, please. So the goal here is to reduce release mortality, and numerous studies have demonstrated that fish that are caught and released while using these non-offset circle hooks are more likely to survive than a fish caught using the traditional J hooks when you're using natural bait. In the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you can see these illustrated for you, the J hook kind of pointing, parallel to the shaft where the circle hook kind of turns back sharply towards the shaft. And then you can also see non-offset and offset hooks. So the ASMSC Law Enforcement Committee has discussed the difficulty with enforceability of such sorts of regulations. However, they saw that there was a good added value of adding a circle hook requirement that could reduce recreational release mortality for sharks. They did stress that we should adopt consistent language by all states, including a definition of a circle hook, which is what we'll go over when we look at our regulation. Next slide. To start off with the first section 20 of this regulation, this will be on page 1 of the regulation. We added 2 definitions, the first being for our first issue, which is establishing that annual quota means Virginia's 10.795% share of the annual coastwide commercial spiny dogfish quota as managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. The second definition is for circle hook, where circle hook means a non-offset, non-stainless steel hook with the point turned sharply back and straight towards the shank. Next slide, please. So if you turn your attention to pages 5 and 6, these notes are in brown because they are just some language changes and they don't really change the intent. So for section 30, we added the word commercial gear restrictions because we wanted to just clarify that this is only commercial gear restrictions. We actually removed a recreational gear restriction down to a later section. So you'll see that subsection D has been crossed out here. That was just moved down to section 40. So you'll see that on the next page. And then in our new subsection E, we just adjusted some of the language so that we maintain consistency among the subsections, makes things a little bit easier to understand. Next slide, please. So moving on to pages 6 and 7, this is section 40. We've added the terminology and gear restrictions to the title of this section. Again, because this was pertaining to recreational harvest limitations, we wanted to add the recreational gear restrictions to this section to keep things consistent throughout. So new subsection G is just moved from the previous section, and new subsection H is actually pertaining to our circle hook. So new subsection H reads, any person fishing recreationally for sharks shall use non-offset, corrodable, non-stainless steel circle hooks, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures. Next slide, please. Now we're moving into our other issue, which is setting the commercial spiny dogfish quota. This is in section 42 on page 9. You can see that in subsection A, we've just made a few of those changes in brown that are just clarifying what a fishing year is and what it means. We've removed the poundage number from subsection A, and replace that with annual quota except as specified in subsection B of this section. Subsection B clarifies that if a quota transfer occurs between Virginia and another state or region participating in the Interstate Fisheries Management Plan for spiny dogfish, Virginia's annual quota for the fishing year shall be limited to the annual quota amount as adjusted for transfers. Next slide, please. Still in section 42, you can turn your attention to pages 9 and 10. These are some simple language changes. We've shifted the rest of the subsections in this section to accommodate that new subsection B that I just read on our previous slide. We made some slight language changes, again, for consistency among subsections. A few of the other edits that were made is we specified that we are discussing the annual quota, and that can be edited by subsections A and B, which I also read on our previous slide. Next slide, please. So our staff recommendation here is to approve amendments to Chapter 4 VAC 20-490 pertaining to sharks to establish the commercial spiny dogfish annual quota for the 2020 fishing year using Virginia's percent allocation, which is the 10.795% of the coastwide commercial spiny dogfish quota, and to require the use of non-offset, non-stainless steel circle hooks when fishing for sharks recreationally, except when fishing with flies or artificial lures. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions by members of the commission? Again, just to make sure, any questions by members of the commission on this matter? Thank you. This is a public hearing. Anyone in the public wish to be heard on this matter, for or against? Hearing none, the matter is before the commission.
Dr. Neal, move to approve staff recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Minor, correct?
John Zedrin.
Mr. Zedrin, okay, thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Taggart?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is pertaining to the lowly scupper porgy. Who has that one?
Jill Ramsey.
Hello, Jill.
Good afternoon, Commissioner, Commission members.
Proceed, please.
Okay. Okay, this is a public hearing today to amend Chapter 4 VAC 20-910 pertaining to SCUP to establish the commercial SCUP summer period fishery quota for 2020 and to modify language for the commercial SCUP winter 2 period per trip landing limits. Next slide. Okay, today we have 2 issues for you. The first issue is going to be about the summer period quota. In October of 2019, the Council and the ASMFC established catch and landing limits for the 2020 coastwide commercial SCUP fishery at 22.2 million pounds, which is a 7% decrease compared to 2019. And then on May 15th, 2020, NOAA published their final rule that will decrease the coastwide commercial SCUP quota for 2020. SCUP is a little bit different as the coastwide quota is split into 3 periods, winter 1, summer, and then winter 2. Winter 1 and winter 2 are monitored by National Marine Fisheries Service, and the summer period is monitored by each state individually. Next slide. This chart shows the breakdown of each period. For this issue, we are just focusing strictly on the summer period only. The summer period runs from May 1 through September 30th. The annual
quota, the summer period receives 38.95%, and each state sets their own specific landing limit. As you can see here, in Virginia, we have a 5,000 pound possession limit. Next slide. So out of the summer period breakdown, Virginia receives 0.165% of the coastwide summer period allocation. For 2020, that gives us a quota of 14,287 pounds. So staff has removed the quota poundage number and replaced it with Virginia's percent allocation, just like you just heard from Shanna with spiny dogfish and also bluefish. This is going to increase regulatory efficiency when NOAA publishes their final rule. Next slide. Okay, our second issue today for SCUP is addressing the winter 2 per trip possession limit. For the winter 2 period, the possession limits are announced by National Marine Fisheries Services annually when it is determined how much of the coastwide quota remains from the winter 1 period. The winter 2 period runs October 1 through December 31st, and there is a provision in the Fisheries Management Plan that allows for any unused winter 1 coastwide quota to be rolled over to winter 2. Depending on this rollover amount, that will be the federal possession limit set for winter 2. For regulatory efficiency, staff recommends language that would allow Virginia to reflect the per trip possession limit when established by National Marine Fisheries Service. Excuse me. What happens here in Virginia is that the National Marine Fisheries Service will announce the possession limit at the beginning of October. And the way our meetings are scheduled, staff can usually have it in regulation by November, but that's kind of an after the fact issue. So what we would like to do here is we would like to establish language where we can reflect what the federal possession limit is, and we do not have to change the actual number in regulation every fall. So once this trip limit is announced at the start of the winter 2 period, staff will post the information on the Commission's website. And all of the vessels that are landing SCUP in Virginia during this time are federally licensed vessels. So they're already notified by National Marine Fisheries Service about the possession limit and have to follow them anyway. So staff feels that this is not an extra burden on our stakeholders. Next slide, please. Okay, our regulation changes for today. The first one's going to be in section 20, the definition section. We're going to define the Virginia summer period quota means Virginia's 0.165% share of the annual coastwide commercial SCUP summer period quota managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Next slide. Okay, section 45B. This is going to actually address the winter 2 period. So during the commercial winter 2 period, October 1 through December 31st of each year, it shall be unlawful for any person to possess aboard any vessel or land in Virginia any amount of SCUP totaling more than the federal per trip possession limit that has been announced by National Marine Fisheries Service. This federal per trip possession limit will be posted on the Commission website. Next slide. Okay, section 45 again, this is letter C. This is going to address the possession limits and harvest quota. So this will be the summer period. The commercial SCUP summer period, May 1 through September 30th, shall be allocated 100% of the Virginia summer period quota. It shall be unlawful for any person to possess aboard any vessel in Virginia more than 5,000 pounds of SCUP during the summer period. Next slide. Staff recommends the Commission amend Chapter 4 VAC 20-910 pertaining to SCUP to establish the commercial SCUP summer period fishery quota for 2020 using Virginia's allocation, 0.165%, of the coastwide commercial SCUP summer period quota. Staff also recommends modifying language for the commercial SCUP winter 2 period per trip possession limits to reflect the limits announced by National Marine Fisheries Service. That completes my presentation, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions from Ms. Ramsey by members of the commission on scup or porgy? They're hearing none. This is a public hearing. Anyone in the public wish to be heard on this matter, for or against? They're hearing none. The matter is before the commission for action.
This is Dr. Neal. Move to accept staff recommendation.
Motion made by Dr. Neal to accept staff. Is there a second?
Second, Chad Ballard.
Second by Mr. Ballard. Further discussion? Mr. Tankard?
Aye.
Mr. Zedrin?
Aye.
Dr. Neal?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Mr. Minor?
Aye.
Ms. Lusk?
Aye.
Ms. Everett?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes unanimously. That's all I have on the agenda. Is there any other matter to come before this commission on this day? Anyone have anything under new business or wish to be heard? If not, I thank each and every one of you for your diligence, your patience, and your dedication, and your service to the Commonwealth. I hope all stays well, and if you need me, as always, don't hesitate to give me a call, and see you next time, same place, maybe same channel, who knows? But thank you. Meeting adjourned.